My name is Elise Campbell. I'm 29 years old. And when I was 12, my parents made me a bet with the world, and I lost. They left me at Union Station with a crumpled $5 bill and a lie about bottled water. They said we were going to visit cousins. They smiled as they sent me to the kiosk and vanished before I could turn around. Hours passed, then days, and still no one came back. The only thing they left me was a train ticket and a question I'd spend years trying to answer. Why does someone abandon their child on purpose? I didn't get closure. I didn't even get goodbye. But what I did get was something they never planned for. A life, a mission, and a voice that echoed louder than their silence ever could. Before I tell you how that abandoned girl became the founder of Way Home, a place for every child who was told they weren't enough, let me know where you're watching from. And if you believe no child should be left behind, not by family, not by the system, hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because this story doesn't start with justice. It starts with a departure and ends with a door that never closes again. The heat inside Union Station pressed against my skin like a wet towel. The ceiling arched high above, echoing footsteps and announcements in a chaotic symphony of movement. I remember the flicker of fluorescent lights, the sharp scent of gasoline wafting in from the tracks, and the way my mother's hand let go of mine just a second too early. We had arrived under the guise of a surprise. My father claimed we were going to visit cousins in Michigan. He smiled, wide but empty, and my mother nodded as if she were simply enduring the moment. They both wore their usual distance like it was perfume, sharp, sophisticated, and impossible to breathe through. "Elise, sweetheart," my mother said, brushing imaginary dust from my collar. "Go grab us some water, would you? The kiosk's just over there." I hesitated. Her eyes didn't meet mine, but her lips were curved in a way I'd come to associate with forced affection. My father slipped a crumpled $5 bill into my palm, and I turned, the sound of my sneakers lost beneath the thunder of rolling luggage and screeching brakes. I remember choosing the water bottles carefully, even though the line was long. I remember being proud of not asking questions, of being helpful. That's what I was good at. Being quiet, being agreeable. But when I returned, they were gone. I stood exactly where they had left me. Platform 7, just by the vending machines. I turned in a slow circle, thinking maybe they'd moved to find a bench or check the schedule. I walked to the ticket counter, to the food court, to the restrooms. I asked a security guard if he'd seen them. A tall man with a blue tie, a woman in a gray cardigan. "No," he said flatly. "Lots of people here today." Hours passed like minutes carved into stone. I sat on my suitcase until my legs went numb, watching every figure that entered the station. I looked for the shape of my mother's hair, the tilt of my father's chin, the exact sound of his impatient sigh. It wasn't until evening, when a station attendant with kind eyes and tired hands knelt beside me, that someone realized I wasn't just waiting. "Hey there," he said softly. "You alone?" I nodded. He offered me a chocolate bar and led me to an office tucked behind the ticket booths. I didn't cry. Not that night. Not the one after. The police came. They asked questions I didn't know how to answer. "Do you have any relatives nearby? Did your parents mention anything about not coming back? Were they upset with you?" Eventually, someone picked up the phone and found out the Campbells had left the state hours earlier. A hotel clerk confirmed they'd checked out the same morning. Their room was empty, stripped of everything except a folded brochure about letting children grow. The woman at Child Welfare had short red hair and hands that smelled like citrus lotion. She read from a form filled out by the officers. Her voice caught slightly at one line. "Suspected abandonment. Intentional." I looked up at her. "Are they coming back?" She didn't answer. She just reached out and gently removed the train ticket still clutched in my hand. They kept it, but I would later steal it back. I learned that week how to fold silence into armor. I learned what it meant to be unwanted and how quickly people shape your story for you. The girl who didn't cry. The girl who just stared at the door. Foster care was a blur. 3 homes in 6 months. Some were kind, some were indifferent. But I carried the ticket in every book I read, tucked between pages like a secret no one else deserved to see. 17 years later, that same ticket, creased, fragile, rests in the novel I keep on my office desk. I run my finger across its edge as I stare out the window, watching Chicago pulse beyond the glass. The past doesn't knock. It breaks in. Elise, are you okay? The voice pulls me from the memory like a thread snapping. I blink. Caleb stands in the doorway, concern written into the crease between his eyebrows. They didn't share my blood, but they gave me back my breath. The cabin smelled like cinnamon and wood polish. I remember standing at the doorway, clutching a backpack that felt too heavy for a single week. My social worker had explained that it was just a trial. 7 days with a foster couple in Evanston who had never taken in children before. No pressure, she said. Just a possibility. Julia Monroe greeted me with a smile that didn't ask anything from me. She wore a green flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and had curly auburn hair pulled into a low ponytail. Patrick stood behind her, quiet but warm, holding a mug that said, "World's okayest cook." The cabin looked like it belonged in a postcard. Soft yellow lighting, stacks of books, a dog-eared photo of a hiking trail pinned to the fridge. And for the first time in 2 years, no one asked me to explain who I was or why I didn't speak much. They gave me space. That was the first kindness. Even so, I didn't unpack. My toothbrush stayed zipped inside my bag. I memorized the exits. I practiced lines I might need. Polite, brief, forgettable. 3 days passed. On the 4th morning, Julia found me on the back porch, watching the squirrels dart through the trees. She handed me a bowl of oatmeal, steaming and drizzled with honey. "What if I break your expectations?" I asked her quietly, almost a whisper. She sat beside me. "Then we reset expectations," she said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. I looked at her, waiting for the catch. There wasn't one. Then came the sessions with Dr. Vivian Hart, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a collection of ceramic owls on her office shelves. I sat on the edge of her couch for 3 whole sessions, answering her questions with shrugs or silence. She didn't push. She just waited, occasionally offering peppermint tea and stories about other kids who didn't want to talk either. In our 4th session, she handed me a blank notebook. "You don't have to talk to me, but maybe talk to the page," she said. I rolled my eyes, but I took the notebook home. Eventually, words came out. First in scribbles, then in full sentences. Sometimes angry, sometimes numb, but they came. By 16, I laughed more. By 18, I asked questions. I challenged rules. I told Julia she put too much cumin in her chili. I teased Patrick for calling himself a grill master while burning corn on the cob. I painted my bedroom wall with quotes I loved, including one that Dr. Hart had once said during a session. "If you don't tell your story, someone else will rewrite it in their own way." That quote followed me to college, where I chose sociology because I wanted to understand what happens when society forgets its children. I volunteered with youth shelters, tutored kids in the system, and once helped a runaway teenage girl navigate her way back to court safely. That night changed everything. I called Julia at midnight. "What if I started something real?" "Then we'll help you build it," she said. And so Way Home was born. First as an idea in my dorm room, then a pilot project funded by church bake sales and charity runs. It became a community-rooted effort to offer shelter, therapy, and mentorship to teens who aged out of the system too early or fell through the cracks. Our logo was a winding path leading to a little house, drawn by one of the girls we helped. She said it looked like what hope might feel like. In 2017, I stood on a stage at the University of Illinois, accepting the Young Community Builder Award in a navy dress I borrowed from Julia. My palms were shaking as I gripped the podium. "Every child deserves a map," I said, voice steady. "But sometimes we have to become the compass ourselves." The applause was polite, then loud, then overwhelming. Patrick cried. Julia filmed it with tears in her eyes. Dr. Hart sent flowers and a note that said simply, "Your story is yours now." After the ceremony, I stayed late at the office, sorting through donation forms and outreach emails. Caleb had offered to help, but I told him I needed a quiet night. Just me and the warm hum of possibility. That's when Dr. Hart knocked softly on the door. She hadn't aged much. Still the same kind smile, still the peppermint tea in her tote. "I almost forgot," she said, pulling out a small white envelope from her bag. "Someone's been trying to reach you." She placed it in my hand, her fingers resting on mine just a second longer than usual. I looked down at the return address. Ryan Campbell. My breath caught like a thread tangled in a zipper. My pass didn't knock. It sent a formal letter. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope, the handwriting too neat, too deliberate, like it was trying too hard to be neutral. At first, I thought it was another donor correspondence or maybe a handwritten thank you note from one of our outreach families. But when I flipped it over and saw the name, Ryan Campbell, my stomach turned in that old familiar way, like falling down the stairs in slow motion. I sat at my desk in the way home office, sunlight slanting through the windows. Outside, early spring clung to the trees like a tentative promise. Inside, it was March 10th, and we were preparing for our 10th anniversary gala. 10 years of a life I had built without them. 10 years of stories that started in emergency shelters and ended in real bedrooms with soft pillows and names on the mailboxes. I didn't open the envelope right away. I stared at it as if waiting for it to vanish. Caleb walked in carrying 2 coffees. His eyes went to the envelope in my hand, then back to my face. He didn't ask. He never asked too soon. Instead, he sat, slid my coffee toward me, and said softly, "Do you want me to stay or step away?" "Just stay," I murmured, tearing the envelope open. Inside was a short letter, not even a full page. Just a request, almost bureaucratic in its tone. Our father, Mark Campbell, had been hospitalized after a stroke. He was in the ICU at St. Catherine's Hospital in downtown Chicago. Ryan hoped I would consider visiting. It ended with, "I know we don't deserve anything, but he keeps saying your name, even when he's not fully lucid." I didn't cry. Not immediately. Instead, I was 13 again, huddled in the corner of the kitchen as Mark shouted that I needed toughening up. I saw Ryan standing there, older than me, always stronger. I remembered the way he turned away. Not in cruelty, in fear. Later that night, I sat in our apartment, the envelope still on the table. Caleb handed me dinner, takeout noodles, but I didn't touch them. He didn't press. Instead, he washed dishes while I stared out the window at the lights of the city blinking like uncertain stars. "I don't know if I want to see him," I said, barely louder than the running water. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," Caleb said gently, "but I'll be with you, whatever you choose." The next morning, I agreed to meet Ryan at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the hospital. It was gray outside, the kind of day that pressed on your skin. Ryan was already seated when I arrived, thinner than I remembered, with shadows under his eyes and a jaw that twitched when he sipped his coffee. He stood when I approached, awkward, unsure. "Elise?" he said. It wasn't a greeting, more like a question. I sat, didn't smile. He pulled out a folded photo, a printout from the hospital. Our father, pale, tubes everywhere. A shell of the man I remembered, yet somehow still too familiar. "I know this is a lot," Ryan started. "I don't have the right to ask you anything." "Then don't," I replied. He looked down. "After they left you at the station, I wanted to call the police. I even picked up the phone. But Dad, he said if I did, I'd be next, that I'd be cut off." "I don't need an excuse," I said, sharper than I intended. "No," Ryan said, but I needed the truth. You deserved that. We sat in silence. He keeps asking for you, Ryan added after a while. Sometimes he calls you Janet. Sometimes he says the one who didn't cry. His voice cracked. But he says your name, Elise, over and over. Why now? I asked. I don't want him to die thinking there's nothing left to answer for, he said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't think I'd even know what to do with it. I just thought maybe you'd want to look him in the eye. I stared at the photo again. Then I said, tell him to stay alive. I'm coming, but not for closure, for confrontation. We didn't hug. Back at the apartment, I packed a small bag, just in case the visit dragged. Just in case I needed something to hold on to after. Caleb stood by the door, keys in hand. He didn't speak. As I stepped outside, the city air hit me like a splash of cold water. I slid into the passenger seat. Caleb glanced at me. Do you want me to come? I nodded. But don't speak. Not unless I fall apart. I didn't expect him to cry. I expected a lie. The scent of antiseptic hit me the second the ICU doors slid open. Cold, sharp, metallic. Like the smell of guilt that had been scrubbed too many times but still clung to the corners. The hallway stretched ahead in a silence so thick, even the steady beeping of monitors felt like an intrusion. Ryan walked beside me without speaking. He had already asked if I was sure. I hadn't answered. Not out loud. Room 514. Isolation. 2 security guards stood by the door. Standard policy, they said, when someone had filed a restraining order. I showed my ID, signed the waiver, and walked in with the weight of 17 years pressing against my ribs. He was smaller than I remembered. Mark Campbell lay half-curled on the hospital bed, wrapped in too many tubes, his chest rising in stuttered movements. The light above him flickered faintly. His skin looked paper-thin, his jaw sharp as if life had been chewing at him slowly. The last time I saw that face, it had turned away from me at Union Station. I stepped closer. He stirred. Elise? He croaked. Not like a question, like a memory trying to crawl its way out of his throat. I didn't answer. For a moment, there was something fragile in the room, like porcelain on the edge of a table. His eyes searched mine, watery, uncertain. Then a tremor ran through his jaw. I'm sorry, he whispered. You weren't supposed to break. You were supposed to grow. I stared. So it was a lesson? He blinked. You needed to learn. Strength doesn't come from handouts. You were too soft. You gambled me, I said, my voice flat. You left me like a stray dog at a train station. You called it love, then walked away. He coughed, face tightening. I knew you'd survive. I needed to know if you deserved to. My hands curled into fists. You needed to know if I deserved to survive? I repeated, quieter now, and far more dangerous. You starved me of kindness so you could test my grit? Beside me, Ryan flinched. Mark looked past me into something only he could see. Janet thought it was too much, but she agreed. Said, if the world was cruel, better it came from us than strangers. She agreed to abandon her daughter? I asked, feeling my spine go rigid. She's dead to me. She's in Arizona, Ryan murmured, finally speaking. She didn't want to come. I didn't ask her to. Mark coughed again, a wet rattle. Do you hate me? I exhaled slowly, then walked toward the chair beside his bed and pulled the leather bracelet from my wrist, the one given to me by a stranger in a train station, the only adult who saw me that day. I placed it on the bedside table. This is the only compass I ever needed, not you. He blinked, lips trembling. Hating you would mean you still matter, I said. I don't hate you. I healed. Ryan turned away. Your brother didn't protect me. You watched. He watched, and I lived in spite of both of you. Mark's fingers twitched. I rose to my feet. You left a child behind and called it parenting. I built a life from the bones you tried to bury, and I don't need your forgiveness or your guilt. As I stepped toward the door, Nurse Olivia stood near the monitor, lips slightly parted. She hadn't moved the entire time. Her eyes shimmered with something she didn't know how to name. "No one teaches this part in nursing school," she whispered. I gave her a small nod. Outside, the two security guards looked up, recognizing me. Ryan didn't follow. I didn't wait. Just as I reached the elevator, a voice shouted from behind. "Elise!" the nurse called out, rushing after me. He wants to see your mother." I let out a breath, part exhale, part laugh. "Then he'll have to ask her ghost," I said, pressing the elevator button, "because she's dead to all of us." They left me at a station. I built a city. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the Evanston Community Center, soft and anticipatory, the kind of silence that leans forward. The 10th anniversary of Way Home had drawn a full house. Former residents in pressed suits and bright dresses, donors with champagne glasses clinking gently, journalists cradling their phones like weapons. At the side of the stage, I stood still. The nerves didn't come from fear. They came from truth. Behind me, Caleb stood like a shadow I trusted. Dr. Hart sat front row, a pale blue handkerchief clutched in one hand, her spine straight but her shoulders soft. And somewhere among the crowd, Ryan. I didn't look for him. I stepped into the light. "I want to thank you all," I began, voice clear. 10 years ago, I opened a door. I didn't know if anyone would walk through, but you did. Hundreds of you. And tonight, I want to show you why that door had to exist in the first place. The LED screen flickered to life behind me. The room stilled again. It began with the sound of a train speaker. Distant, garbled, familiar. Union Station, 2006. The grainy footage showed a small figure clutching a paper cup, searching the crowd. Then a freeze frame. My 12-year-old self, blinking into the blur. The next clip, black and white footage of a hospital room, dim and sterile. My voice off screen, steady. His voice, hoarse, broken. "You needed to grow," he said. "I needed to know if you deserved to survive." A moment of silence. Then my voice again. "This is the only compass I ever needed. Not you." The final scene. Me walking away. The video faded to black. My voice narrated the last lines, pre-recorded but trembling. Some children grow up in chaos. Some are abandoned as a test. But to the ones still standing, you are not broken because they left. They are broken because they did. Silence. And then applause. First soft, then rising. A wave. People on their feet, some wiping their faces, others clapping with the force of release. I stood still and breathed it all in. In the corner of my eye, Dr. Hart dabbed beneath her glasses. Caleb hadn't moved. He didn't need to. His presence was a vow. From the center aisle, Ryan stepped forward. He didn't take the mic. He didn't ask permission. He simply raised his voice enough to carry. "She taught me what family really means," he said, "by not being one. And then, by showing me how to rebuild it anyway." A ripple of murmurs. I met his eyes. He didn't look for forgiveness, only truth. That was enough. I took the mic again. "We can't choose the families we're born into," I said. "But we damn sure can build better ones." Applause thundered again, this time with something feral in it. Hunger, hope, grief. I let it wrap around me like a wind I wasn't afraid of. By midnight, the video had been clipped and uploaded to every platform I knew. Within 12 hours, Your Way Home was trending in 5 states. By day 2, I had an inbox full of press inquiries, a TEDx invitation, and a number I had to read twice. $3 million in new donations. But that wasn't the surprise. The surprise came with a ringtone. I was in my office, half asleep on the couch, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened. A man's voice, clipped and polite. This is Randall Brooks, attorney for Janet and Mark Campbell. There's been a development regarding their estate. Ms. Campbell left a will, and it names you. We need to talk. He left me nothing, and I still had everything. The conference room was lined with glass, the kind of polished silence that made every chair creak like a confession. 2 weeks had passed since the video went live, and 2 weeks since I heard the name Campbell spoken with anything but bitterness. I didn't want to be here. Ryan sat across from me in a gray blazer and navy tie that couldn't quite hide the fatigue under his eyes. He hadn't said much since we walked in. Caleb waited outside. He understood. This part I had to do alone. The attorney, Randall Brooks, cleared his throat and opened a thick leather folder. Per the instructions of the deceased, Mr. Mark Campbell, we are proceeding with the reading of his final will and testament. He slid 2 copies across the table. I didn't touch mine. There's no ambiguity, he continued. The estate, approximately $2.7 million in liquid assets, and the property in Scottsdale, is left to Mr. Ryan Campbell. Ryan nodded, jaw tight. I said nothing. The attorney turned a page. There is one conditional note. A discretionary trust in the amount of $7,500 was allocated to Miss Elise Campbell, with a handwritten clause. He lifted a small envelope, opened it, and read aloud. To Elise, you don't need my money. You already own your world, and I ruined mine. Mark. Silence settled, soft and almost respectful. Ryan looked at me, expectant. I reached for the document, not the will, but the waiver. The one that said I wouldn't claim the trust, wouldn't dispute the estate, wouldn't take a single cent. I signed. The pen moved with a steadiness that surprised me. May I ask, Randall said, why you're waiving your rights? I met his eyes. Because this isn't revenge, I said. It's release. Ryan let out a breath. Not relief exactly, but something close to surrender. He folded his copy of the will and said quietly, Then I want to fund another center. Under your name. You lead, I'll follow. We didn't shake hands. We didn't hug. But I felt the shift, silent and real. 2 months later, the New Way Home Center opened on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. Sunlight poured through the skylights as children chased each other between murals and beanbags. Donors mingled by the lemonade stand. Cameras clicked. And in the middle of it all, a girl stood beside me. 9 years old, wide eyes, short curls, holding my hand like a question. Her name was Zoe. She tugged at my sleeve. Is this home? I crouched beside her and smiled. It's the beginning. Behind us, Caleb joined the volunteers handing out welcome kits. Dr. Hart stood by the garden, talking to a local therapist about replicating our trauma care program. And Ryan, he was laughing. Real laughter, not the brittle kind. That night, I returned to my desk and pulled out a piece of stationery I hadn't touched in years. I wrote the final letter, not to be sent, not to be read, but to be released. Dear Mark, you lost me before I was old enough to understand why. You tried to make me a test, a symbol, a lesson. But I wasn't your experiment. I was your daughter, and I made it. Not because of you, but in spite of you. I made it. And I made sure no one walks alone again. I folded the letter, slipped it into the bottom drawer, and locked it. Weeks later, a national TV interviewer asked the last question of our segment. If you could speak to your 12-year-old self, standing at that train station, what would you say? I looked directly into the camera. I'd say, they failed you, but you didn't. I stood in the doorway of the New Way Home Center, fingers tracing the polished wood of the entrance sign. Behind me, Zoe was laughing with Caleb, her newly combed hair bouncing as she darted between paper balloons and colorful posters that read, Welcome Home. A place I once thought didn't exist. Not for girls like me. I never expected it would end this way. Not with speeches or TEDx invitations. Not with a legal letter or inheritance offers I never asked for. And certainly not with Ryan, my brother who once turned his back on me. standing beside me, holding a pair of ceremonial scissors and saying, "You lead, I'll follow." But maybe that's what surviving does to a person. You keep walking until one day, the ground beneath your feet feels solid again. And then, somehow, you start building. The past didn't let me go easily. It kept clawing back, through letters, lawyers, memories disguised as dreams. I thought closure would feel like a slammed door. What I got instead was something quieter and heavier: the truth. My father never once saw me as a daughter. I was an experiment, an unwanted variable in his twisted equation of worthiness. And my mother, Janet, she made her decision long before that train station. She just waited for the right moment to disappear. Still, I didn't burn everything down. I didn't show up at court in fury or name names on national TV. I simply told the story, word for word. And somehow, in that honesty, I found not vengeance, but release. When I played the ICU recording on the giant LED screen during Way Home's anniversary, I didn't flinch. I let the world hear him say it. I needed to know if you deserve to survive. I watched people gasp. Dr. Hart sobbed. Caleb gripped the back of a chair so hard his knuckles whitened. And when the video ended, and the applause didn't stop, I didn't smile in triumph. I only said one thing. You are not broken because they left. They are broken because they did. 2 weeks later, in that silent law office with dark mahogany shelves and a view of Lake Michigan, the lawyer slid the will across the table. Ryan looked away. Mark Campbell had left everything to him, except one small account under my name. But the note that came with it? That was the real inheritance. She doesn't need my money. She already owns her world. I signed the waiver without hesitation. I didn't need his guilt. I didn't need the funds. I had already built something far greater, a legacy not of blood, but of choice. I left the office that day lighter than I had felt in years. Zoe found me near the garden beds at the new center. She tugged my sleeve and asked, "Is this place really home?" I knelt to her level, touched the little leather bracelet still around my wrist, the same one a stranger had once given me when I was abandoned and terrified at Union Station. And I said, "It's the beginning." Later that night, I wrote one last letter to Mark. I never mailed it. I never intended to. But I needed the words out of me. I made it. I built something you never could. Not because of you, but in spite of you. And I will make sure no child has to walk through that kind of fire alone again. I folded the letter and slid it into the drawer of my desk. Beside it, I placed the old train ticket. I kept it not as a reminder of pain, but as proof. From that very platform where I was left behind, a different journey had begun. Some things cannot be undone, but they can be outgrown. She didn't fight for closure. She stood for truth. And in doing so, shattered the myth that survival was enough. Because she didn't just survive. She rewrote the ending. Like the final strike of a long muted bell, justice came. Not with noise, but with clarity. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. And somewhere out there, another child listens, breathes easier, and begins to walk, because someone once dared to walk first. They left me at a train station and thought I'd vanish. But I built a life, a legacy, a way home not just for me, but for every child who's ever been silenced, overlooked, or left behind. If this story stayed with you, if you believe no child should have to earn their right to be loved, then share this video. Leave a comment below. Tell me who you're walking home for. And subscribe, not for me, but for the next child who needs to know. Your voice matters. You matter. And you were never the problem. Thank you for listening. This is Elise. And this time, I gotta write the ending.